The death of a DNC staffer is stirring up controversy as conflicting reports continue to pour in. Seth Rich was murdered last July, and so far police have made no arrest in the case and have no leads. One America News believes solving this case and bringing Rich's murderer to justice is essential to exposing the truth for the American people. We are offering a $100,000 reward for any information that leads to the arrest of a suspect in the case. If you have any information, please send an email to tips@oann.com. One America's Pearson Sharp has more.
On July 10th, 2016, Seth Rich was murdered. Of that, there can be no doubt. But that's apparently where the line between fact and fiction begins to get a little blurred. According to the mainstream media, Seth Rich was killed after leaving a bar that night in an apparent robbery that went horribly wrong. And that's the extent of their narrative. Past that, it's all a right-wing conspiracy theory that's politically motivated and has no basis in reality. But let's set those accusations aside for just a moment and look at the facts. We want to stress that our only agenda is to find the truth and that everything we report here is simply revealing the facts that we've uncovered in our investigation. Facts and not opinions. And from an objective standpoint, they simply don't add up. So what are the facts? Well, Seth left Lewis City Bar around 1:45 a.m. and refused to ride home, even though staff say that he was unusually drunk. He told them that he was heading to Wonderland Ballroom, another popular bar that was only a 10-minute walk away. But he never arrived. Staff say that he was distressed that night, noticing that something was clearly bothering Rich, who they described as normally a very good-natured guy. It would have taken Seth about half an hour to walk the mile back to his Bloomingdale Row house. But he didn't go straight home. And 2.5 hours later, at 4:19 a.m., just a block from his home, he was gunned down by unknown attackers. He was on the phone with his girlfriend at the time, and she says that she heard scuffling noises on the other end of the line, but Rich told her not to worry and hung up. Authorities say that he was shot twice in the back and had bruises on his hands, knees, and face, and appeared to have been in a scuffle with his attackers. Yet no DNA evidence has emerged from that apparent altercation. He was taken to the hospital, where he died about an hour and a half later at 5:57 a.m. It all sounds pretty straightforward. But digging deeper, holes begin to emerge. Problems start with the police claim that Rich was robbed due to a high number of recent muggings and robberies in the area. But despite having an expensive watch, wads of cash, and a mobile phone, nothing was stolen. It's pretty unusual for a robbery, but let's move on. The case gets a little stranger when you consider that before his death, Seth Rich was investigating several cases involving the DNC's electoral fraud and voter suppression, and was set to testify in the case of Hillary Clinton's email investigation. The content of his scheduled testimony isn't clear, but it does raise questions about the scandal involving the DNC. But that was all last July. To get up to speed, the case broke into the national spotlight once again on May 15th, when private investigator Rod Wheeler came forward, claiming that there was more to the case than what was being reported in the news. Wheeler was hired by Rich's family in March to find Seth's murderer. According to Wheeler, he was in contact with a federal investigator who had personally laid eyes on Rich's laptop. An FBI forensic report made just 96 hours after Rich's death shows that he made contact with Gavin McFadden, a director of WikiLeaks and a mentor to founder Julian Assange. The federal investigator, who requested to remain anonymous, said that sometime before May 21st, 2016, Rich transferred 44,053 emails and 17,761 attachments belonging to DNC leaders. Those emails were dated from January of 2015 all the way to late May of 2016. On July 22nd, just 12 days after Rich was killed, WikiLeaks published the exact same number of DNC emails that were allegedly given to them by Rich, showing conspiracy against Bernie Sanders and leading to Debbie Wasserman Schultz resigning as the DNC chairperson. Incidentally, Gavin McFadden later died on October 22nd, 2016, just days before the presidential election. His cause of death was listed as lung cancer. Wheeler also stated that the D.C. police have been incredibly unhelpful, even saying that a source inside the department had told him to stand down and back off the case. But now the story gets even more interesting. A day after releasing this statement, Rod Wheeler, the private investigator, took back everything he'd said. Wheeler chalked it up to a miscommunication and said he got his story from a Fox News reporter as well as other media reports. So where was the miscommunication? Well, let's look at before and after. Monday, Wheeler said on national television, quote, "My investigation up to this point shows that there was some degree of email exchange between Seth Rich and WikiLeaks." He also had this exchange with Fox 5 in D.C. Fox asked, "So you have sources at the FBI saying that there is information?" Wheeler responded, "For sure." Fox asked, "You have sources at the FBI saying that there is information that could link Seth Rich to WikiLeaks?" Wheeler responded, "Absolutely. Yeah, that's confirmed." So was it confirmed, or is that a miscommunication? Then on Tuesday, he came out saying, "I've never ever seen Seth Rich's computer, nor have I talked with the federal investigator." He then told CNN that he had no evidence to suggest that Rich had contacted WikiLeaks before his death. That's quite a miscommunication. It's pretty much the exact opposite of what he said just one day before. And what about his personal conversations with the D.C. police? After all, he stated flat out that his own source inside the department personally told him that he was ordered to back down. But wait, was that a miscommunication as well? Did he actually just read that from a Fox News report?
Every time I talk to the police department about the WikiLeaks or the emails, it's automatically shut down. That discussion is automatically shut down.
What could be responsible for his sudden reversal of opinion about what he actually did or didn't do? I've reached out to Mr. Wheeler, though so far he hasn't returned our calls. Stay with us after the break when we take a closer look at the high-ranking DNC official who's taken a personal interest in preventing anyone from snooping into the case. Of his own previous statements, the anonymous investigator that Wheeler says he did and then didn't speak with still confirmed his story, saying, quote, "I have seen and read the emails between Seth Rich and WikiLeaks." Wheeler has since received a cease and desist letter from the Rich family, who have condemned his report as a breach of contract, calling it deeply hurtful. But Wheeler's statements still contain useful insights. Before recanting his story, he explained that after he called the police to inquire about Seth, a high-ranking member of the DNC promptly phoned the police as well and then called Rich's family. Apparently, the DNC member was demanding to know why Wheeler was snooping into Rich's death. Wheeler has now revealed that a high-ranking DNC official was actually Donna Brazile, the disgraced former DNC chairwoman. Brazile, a CNN contributor and donor to Hillary Clinton's campaign, was forced to step down after she was caught feeding Clinton questions ahead of her presidential debate. Wheeler said Seth Rich had been having trouble at the DNC and was clashing with someone working there. That someone turned out to be Brazile.
A high-ranking official at the DNC, when I called the police department, they got that information and called the Rich family wanting to know why was I snooping around.
But was he snooping around? Or was he just reading news articles and that was just another miscommunication? Wheeler says that he's convinced the answers to whoever is behind Rich's death are on his laptop. However, police say they don't know where the computer is, and the FBI says they don't have it. It was originally reported the FBI had conducted a forensics report of Rich's computer. But now they're claiming it's not their case, and they're referring all questions to the D.C. police. Wheeler's not the only one flip-flopping, however. After their son was murdered, Seth Rich's parents said they were open to any help to find the killer or killers. They even suggested they weren't sure it was a robbery.
If it was a robbery, it failed because he still had his watch, he still had his money, he still had his credit cards, he still had his phone. So it was a wasted effort, except we lost a life.
But their attitudes have changed since then, and now they say it was just a robbery, and anyone contradicting that is simply peddling fake evidence. What brought about that change? It might have happened around the time they brought on Brad Bauman to be their family spokesman. Bauman is a professional crisis consultant, and according to him, every single time a story is reported, it is just hearsay, it's lies, it's politically driven or politically motivated hearsay. And it actually causes the opposite of what everyone wants. It causes the inability for the police and for the independent investigators to figure out what actually happened. But who is Bauman? Well, he's been called a professional Democrat by WikiLeaks and has frequently criticized both Republicans and President Trump, who he says is simply playing the American people and has no respect for the country. He also said the Republican Party is full of, quote, scam artists, hucksters, and sociopaths trying to screw you. He works for the Pastorum Group, which describes itself as a full-service, progressive, values-first communications and political strategy firm working with progressive candidates, causes, and coalitions to create meaningful social change. Bauman was also the executive director for the Congressional Progressive Caucus in D.C., the second largest caucus in Congress. While there, he pushed hard for progressive agenda items and founded the Progressive Action PAC. After all that, it seems doubtful Bauman would have any kind of bias. Yet according to Bauman, anyone who questions Seth Rich's murder was anything more than a robbery deserves a special place in hell. Strong words from a DNC hardliner. And who's paying for his services? Is the Pastorum Group working for free? Is the DNC footing the bill for Bauman's services? Clearly, the DNC, whose leaked emails revealed a conspiracy to undermine Bernie Sanders' campaign, would have no agenda in controlling the narrative around Seth Rich's murder, either. And what about the DNC? Where do they stand in this investigation? Well, in our investigation, one name pops up over and over again: John Podesta. During Hillary's campaign, Podesta was her right-hand man, her former campaign chief, who had tens of thousands of his own emails leaked to the press by WikiLeaks. In those emails, Podesta makes a shocking statement back in 2015 concerning potential leakers. He says, quote, "I'm definitely for making an example of a suspected leaker, whether or not we have any real basis for it." That's pretty startling considering his apparent ties to the Seth Rich murder investigation. Where do those ties begin? Well, for starters, with Officer Robert Wingate Robinson. Robinson was one of the first responding officers who showed up after Seth Rich was shot. He was also a student at Georgetown University at the same time that John Podesta was a professor there. And Robinson's sister, Nandy, worked for Hillary Clinton's campaign as a research associate in 2016. Since last May, she's been the deputy research director at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in D.C. Interesting to have such a well-connected officer as the first one on the scene of a murder involving a DNC staffer who might have been the one to leak tens of thousands of highly sensitive DNC emails. But Podesta's ties don't end there. Seth Rich wasn't dead when Officer Robinson arrived. Police reports say that he was still alive and was talking to the officers and the EMTs. He was taken to Washington Hospital Center, where an unnamed fourth-year surgery resident says that he treated Rich's injuries. The anonymous resident posted online detailing Rich's wounds and explaining that he was shot in the lower back, damaging his liver and leaving several small bowel injuries. The resident, whose story can't be independently verified at this time, said that Rich didn't have any major vascular injuries, and personally he had seen dozens of other cases which were much worse, and the patient had still survived. The resident claimed that nothing about Rich's injuries suggested that he had sustained a fatal wound. However, the resident was then told by the attending physician that he was not to make any more rounds on Seth Rich, who was being surrounded by LEOs, or law enforcement officers. The resident says that no one was allowed to see Rich before he died except the attending physician. After the break, we investigate who that physician was and how his connections take him all the way to the top of the DNC. That night, the attending physician was Dr. Jack Sava. Sava's been a doctor since 2001 and has been a big supporter of Hillary Clinton, even donating $2,700 to her campaign in 2016. He was also on John Podesta's guest list for a Democratic function. Sava was also a frequent visitor to the White House. In fact, he visited the White House a total of 6 times before the night of Seth Rich's murder. His wife visited a whopping 23 times. And it's not clear what their trips involved, but it does seem like a lot of times to visit the White House just because. And Jack Sava and his wife weren't the only ones visiting the White House either. According to official visitors' logs, Joe Capone, the manager at Lou's City Bar, the last place Seth Rich was seen before being shot, also visited the White House. Logs show that Capone stopped by on July 6th, just 4 days before Seth was shot and killed. And here's proof. A picture Capone took from inside the White House and posted online. The picture has since been taken down. The logs also show that he got a meeting in the East Wing, which makes him very special indeed, since that's the area reserved as office space for the First Lady and her staff. And finally, there's Heather Podesta, John's former sister-in-law. Heather serves on the board of the Washington, D.C. Police Foundation right alongside Police Chief Kathy Lanier. Lanier was the chief when Seth Rich was murdered in July, but then stepped down the next month. Heather is also the ex-wife of John Podesta's brother, Tony, whose Podesta Group is one of the most powerful and well-connected lobby organizations in the U.S. So if all of that is a conspiracy theory, where does that leave us? Well, the police still insist that Seth Rich's death was a robbery gone wrong and have no evidence that it was related to his job. But they don't have any evidence it was a robbery either. And their story has changed as well. There was a major discrepancy in the Metropolitan PD's press release, which originally stated that officers first heard gunshots and then responded to the shooting. The later reports insist that officers only found out about the shooting later from an alert on their digital audio surveillance system. There are still a lot of dots to connect and a lot of gaps that don't make sense. According to the mainstream media and Democrats in Washington, Seth Rich's case is a wild goose chase. The real culprits are in Moscow. The story goes that it's actually Russian hackers who broke into the DNC servers and leaked thousands of emails, costing Hillary Clinton the election, and not Seth Rich. They claim that President Trump and his team was colluding with Moscow and Vladimir Putin to discredit Hillary just in time to turn the American public against her in the voting booths. And since they say there's no evidence that Seth Rich was a leaker and that his investigation is a conspiracy theory, surely they've got evidence that it was Russia involved, right? Well, not so far. Despite John Podesta attacking the First Amendment rights of the free press and calling Sean Hannity and Newt Gingrich disgusting for questioning Seth Rich's murder, there's still no evidence that Russia was involved in the election in any way.
We have this very strange story now of this young man who worked for the Democratic National Committee who apparently was assassinated at 4 a.m.
Well, Podesta says the questions about Seth Rich's murder are more examples of fake news from the Russians. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein says that so far he's seen no proof of any crime that was committed or that any prosecution is warranted. No one has even been able to tell what crime was committed that has anything to do with Russia. There's been nothing found to suggest the Kremlin ever hacked the DNC or that the Trump campaign was involved. Ignoring a total lack of evidence, Democrats insist their case is the truth. Seth Rich's murder is just a wild goose chase. But there are a lot of wild geese to simply dismiss them all, especially when those behind the massive leaks that exposed the DNC in the first place say there's something going on. Speaking on Dutch TV program Nieuwsuur, Assange strongly implied that Rich was his informant, though he stopped short of saying it.
Our whistleblowers go to significant efforts to get us material and often very significant risks. As a 27-year-old works for the DNC, who was shot in the back, murdered just 2 weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the street in Washington. So
that was just a robbery, I believe, wasn't it?
No, there's no finding. So
what are you suggesting? What are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that our sources take risks, and they become concerned to see things occurring like that.
But was he one of your sources then? I mean,
we don't comment on who our sources are.
WikiLeaks isn't offering the only proof. Famed international hacker Kim.com has come out and said that he personally knew Seth Rich and that, in fact, Rich handed over the trove of DNC emails to WikiLeaks. Kim claims that Rich went by the online name Panda and contacted him explaining that he was developing voter analytics tools and other technologies to expose corruption and the influence of corporate money in politics. Supporting his claim that Rich was Panda, Seth appeared to use the online handle Panda for Progress for his Twitter and Instagram accounts. Seth also had 2 Skype accounts linked to his second Gmail address, which was also Panda for Progress. He had a suspected Facebook account as well called Pandas for Bernie. Kim has called Seth Rich a hero and promised to deliver evidence to Congress proving that he was the source for WikiLeaks' DNC emails. Adding to the growing doubts over the DNC's official line, Seth's murder wasn't the only peculiar death that summer. On June 22nd, former UN President John Ashe was found dead, with authorities first reporting his death as a heart attack. They later changed their story after an autopsy report showed that he died due to a crushed windpipe. Ashe died just a few days before he was set to testify with his co-defendant, Lak Sun, a Chinese businessman who illegally funneled millions of dollars to American businessman Charlie Tree, who then used the money to donate to the DNC during Bill Clinton's re-election. Charlie Tree was also rumored to be a Clinton Foundation donor during Bill Clinton's reign as president. Prosecutors accused Ashe of accepting thousands of dollars in bribes from the Chinese businessman when he served as a UN president in 2013, the same year that Hillary Clinton served as Secretary of State. According to a letter sent by more than 60 members of the House, the Clinton Foundation is a lawless, pay-to-play enterprise that has been operating under a cloak of philanthropy for years. Solving this case could reveal important clues into the 2016 election and how high up corruption at the DNC really went. So far, One America News, WikiLeaks, the DC Metropolitan Police, and even a Republican lobbyist, Jack Berkman, have all put substantial money towards finding Seth Rich's killer, totaling $250,000. But up to this point, the DNC has never offered any reward for information to help solve the murder of their own staffer. His death has received almost no attention, though to be fair, the DNC did dedicate a bike rack in his honor. And Hillary Clinton took the opportunity to use his death as a chance to push her agenda for more gun control.
He was just 27 years old. Surely we can agree that weapons of war have no place on the streets of America.
For now, there are no clear answers as to who killed Seth Rich or why. Police have called it a robbery, but have no proof. There's growing evidence that it was something much more than a mugging gone wrong, but everyone on the left insists that it's nothing more than a conspiracy theory and coincidence. But it's not just one coincidence or two. It's dozens, and they trace their way all the way to the highest branches of the DNC. Yes, it could be a coincidence that the officers were wearing body cameras, but the footage apparently can't be found. It could be a coincidence that the attending physician has direct ties to Hillary's right-hand man, John Podesta. And it could be a coincidence that Seth's father said that a security camera from a small convenience store across the street captured video of their son collapsing at the feet of 2 men, and that police say that now that footage doesn't exist. But the question we must ask ourselves now is, at what point does one coincidence or 100 add up to something approaching the truth? For One America News, I'm Pearson Sharp.
While One America conducts its in-depth investigation, Judicial Watch is also taking action to solve unanswered questions surrounding that death. One America's John Hines caught up with the president of Judicial Watch and has this report.
Tom, I just wanted to ask you, I know that you've begun an investigation into the death of the DNC staff member, Seth Rich. A lot of people have been asking questions, apparently some possibly suspicious circumstances, a lot of questions, and nobody seems to have the answers. What are you doing, and why have you begun to get involved in this issue?
Well, there's a lot of public controversy about his death, and what we are able to do is use the Freedom of Information laws maybe to get answers and settle the controversies one way or another. There are concerns about the handling of the police investigation and whether there was a political meddling in it. And to that end, just last week, we filed Freedom of Information requests here in the District of Columbia with the police department and the mayor's office. And also, but even last year, we had filed a request with the FBI about Seth Rich because there were reports back then that he was a cooperating witness in the investigations that the FBI were conducting. We didn't get a records response. They said they didn't find anything, but we don't know. And then secondly, we have a separate FOIA for the DNC hack itself because the WikiLeaks people are hinting, and I don't know if they're just playing with us or telling the truth, that Seth Rich was a source for some of the DNC emails that were hacked or leaked to the media last year. So we have a lawsuit about that DNC hacking attempt at the federal level. So we've just a number of Freedom of Information Act requests out there. And, here in Washington, we're not allowed to ask certain questions about certain things because the establishment thinks it's too controversial. And I don't know whether there's a scandal associated with the death of Seth Rich. It's a horrible circumstance. He was murdered. The likeliest answer is the simplest one. He was a random victim of violence here in the District of Columbia, which is too much crime, obviously. But a lot of public controversy about it, and all we're doing is asking the questions. Typically, the agencies have a few weeks to respond, and if, depending on the nature of the response, we're able to go to court to either force the release of records or challenge their failure to respond. And that's available to us under the law both at the federal level and here in the District of Columbia, which is a local government entity.
Do you think it's a little bit curious, for instance, that perhaps the Democratic National Committee or some perhaps Democrats in Congress have not gone in ahead of organizations like yours and others who are beginning to ask these kinds of questions?
Well, I think they're upset that the questions are being asked because it detracts from their conspiracy theory of the election, which is the Russians elected Donald Trump. And I don't understand why they're so sensitive about this. There's an official of the Democratic Party or a staff from the Democratic Party who was murdered. You would think they want to solve the crime too. And I suspect they do, but they don't like anyone asking any questions beyond suggesting it was just the typical random act of violence here in the District of Columbia, because it distracts from their conspiracy theory that they're running with, which is that Donald Trump shouldn't be president.